I really want to just touch on your sufficient decentralization article. It was in depth. I read the whole thing. I liked it. And I just want you to hit us with, what is sufficient decentralization? Because I think it kind of gets to what we've been talking about for the last, 20 minutes around securities, the problem they pose, the risks, and ultimately, I think your sufficient decentralization argument is how projects can classify themselves as not a security and avoid some of these challenges, right? So in just a high level, what is it? And then what are some of the ways that projects can address to not become a security?
Yeah. So the whole purpose of the article was to really focus, as I mentioned earlier, on DAOs and how it is that token holders in those DAOs won't be holding tokens that are considered securities or to be like part of securities because they're investment contracts. And the concept of sufficient decentralization actually comes from an SEC staffer. So this was the former director of a division called Corporate Finance, Bill Hinman. He gave a speech that is very well known back in, I believe it was 2018, where basically what he said is that Ether may have been sold when it was initially sold as a security. And more specifically, he said, leaving aside the initial sale of Ether, transactions in Ether right now are not transactions in securities. And his explanation for that was because if you look at the current state of the Ethereum network and of Ether and of the participants in the network, you no longer have this others from the Howey test to look at for whose expectations of profits you might expect to have. So like if you look at when Ether was initially sold, you had the Ethereum Foundation and you had Vitalik there. And Ether was sold, and it's reasonable that people might have thought, I'm going to make a lot of money on Ether because Vitalik is a genius and he's got this roadmap for Ethereum that is really impressive, and they're going to attract a lot of devs here and then a lot of users, and we're going to make a lot of money. Okay, reasonable, and that's basically what Bill Hinman said. But then what he also said is now fast forward to where Ethereum was then and where it is now. And you look at that and you see tens, if not hundreds of thousands of developers all driving billions of dollars of value through Ethereum. They are hosting podcasts. They are putting out advertising, all for things that are growing the Ethereum ecosystem. And when you see that, what you start looking at and you say, okay, the Howey test for whether there's an investment contract focuses on, at the very end of it, is there an expectation of profit based on the efforts of others? I personally do not expect to profit from my Ether based off of what the Ethereum Foundation does. Like, sure, like ETH2 is going to be important. It's going to impact the value of Ether. But honestly, if all of the dapps on Ethereum go away, Ether's not worth anything. It doesn't matter, ETH 2.0 or not. They're not worth anything. So the value is actually being created by others. And that is the point of sufficient decentralization. It's when you reach the point where you have so much else going around, whether it's development activity, marketing activity, business development activity, going on around a protocol, that the value is coming from what a lot of people are doing with no one identifiable group to drive the value that you're expecting from the crypto.
Makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that explanation. It very interesting to think about how that applies to different NFT projects, different tokens, and ultimately how that could lead to regulation impacting them down the road. So if you're listening right now and you found any of that like interesting and you want to learn more, definitely recommend reading through Marc's article. We'll be sure to like link it in our descriptions and whatnot, so you can find that. Awesome. And then I just want to list out a couple of ways that you mentioned thinking through reducing risk to Web3 participants was around protocol development, business development, growth and marketing, intellectual property, and governance decisions. So we don't have time to dive into all those today, but I thought that was a really cool breakdown. And even just thinking about how like Unstoppable is approaching it with, making some code open source, making things interoperable, how you think about using grants. It definitely gives like founders and entrepreneurs a good framework for how to think through, all right, what areas of the business do we think about decentralizing? And there's this big like debate in crypto around like, oh, are you centralized or are you decentralized? But I think what you also mentioned is like that decentralization can happen over time, and it can happen to different parts of your business through that time frame as well. And just becoming a fully decentralized DAO, like you mentioned, you sacrifice efficiency for innovation in a lot of standpoints, and or just decision making. And so speed and efficiency, right? That's these trade-offs you're making, and it's tough to grow something maybe fully decentralized off the bat. So thinking through how you can apply it to different parts of your business is, I think, a useful exercise. But
Josh, you summarized that better than I could have.
thank you. I seriously have, I got like 5 pages of notes in front of me. If it was printed out, I would have annotated the whole thing. So I found it really interesting. I'm glad you thought I summarized it. That was my biggest fear. I was going to mischaracterize it because we don't have enough time to dive into that today, but maybe on a part 2.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.